Well, hello everyone. Um, every once in a while I get a little curious about different things. When I come across something that is uh, exciting to me, I tend to pursue it and it kind of consumes me, and it's hard for me to think about other things. One of those things that has come across my mind recently is that of pine pollen. There are so many pine trees that are around me, and it's kind of interesting to research more about this tree and how useful it can be. One of the things that happen is the the pinon pine trees that are around here. They produce pine nuts, um, and those are edible. They're very good. They provide a lot of nutrients. And when I started researching pine nuts, that's when I came across pine pollen. So I started finding out a little bit more about pine pollen in this process, and my interests were intrigued, and I researched a little bit more. What I found out, just kind of on the overview of that, pine pollen's been used in China in for many years. Some of the reports, 1,500 years of pine pollen use. That's a lot of years. Some of the benefits of pine pollen, they were comparing. I was reading a study about the nutritional value of pine pollen, and they were saying by weight, there are some similarities to that of an egg. So with the protein levels and the different types of nutrients that are in that egg, a lot of those same nutrients were contained in pine pollen. For example, it contained the 20 amino acids, those proteins that are the building blocks for our bodies, and the building blocks for living organisms. That it contained the essential amino acids as well. Those amino acids that our body does not produce on its own, and that we need to get through diet. And found that pine pollen does have those. And another thing that I read, and there's studies that go back and forth on all this, and I'm not claiming to be an expert on this, but it is interesting to read about pine pollen and its uses. And one of the things that I read is that it contains natural testosterone, and that's kind of rare for plants to contain a testosterone, and pine pollen has that. Now, some people would say, "Oh, that's great," and consume pine pollen, and it'll boost your testosterone levels, and provide all those benefits of higher testosterone for uh, you know if you're building muscle and all those things, and then just the libido of men, just kind of like all these great benefits that are happening out of pine pollen. And then there's other research that says, well, really the levels are not good enough to really do anything, but it's still a good nutrient. Now you can take that for what it's worth, and perhaps there's ways to do that to where you're getting all of those benefits of the pine pollen in your regular diet. If you're noticing in this video that I'm creating kind of as the background for this explanation of pine pollen, I did actually collect some pine pollen and took that pine pollen. I was down in the desert of Arizona. It's warmer climate down there. I live in the mountain region of Arizona, 7,000 feet. And maybe not a lot of people know about Arizona's climate ranges, but Arizona is very diverse. Anyway, I was down in the desert region not too long ago, and I noticed that all their pine trees, they're starting to they're producing the pollen, and my curiosity was already moving on this, and so I thought, I'm going to collect some pine pollen. And the videos down below is kind of that process of what I did, collecting it off the trees. And as you can see on those trees, they are loaded with the male cones, but it's a mess of pollen, and it is everywhere. And if you notice in the videos, when I shake the tree or I cut the cone off of the tree, there is a dust of pollen that just but as you can see in the videos, that the pollen just kind of cakes over my hands, and it just sticks there, and it kind of just tends to stick to things a little bit. And if you notice, if you're out in the woods or if you're in a place, even an urban area where they grow pine trees, you'll notice that when in that season, that pine pollen is just floating everywhere, and it gets over the cars, it gets over the sidewalk, every body of water, it'll just pull up and just kind of float to the edges, and you'll just get this nice yellow ring around the ponds and the lakes. It is just, it cakes everything. You'll also notice in the video that there are different stages of the pine pollen, and I got some pictures of those cones, those male cones, and you'll notice that they grow out, and they definitely have those spore places on the cone, and as they dry, they open up, and then the wind or any movement that hits that tree will just blow them right out of the cone. So I grabbed 3 different kinds, one in just its first stages, and then one where it's about to release that pollen, and then one where pretty much all the pollen has gone from the cone. I also tested out eating one, and I'm going to show that video right here, so I'll cut out for just a minute and show that video. Some of these male cones on the pine tree have not quite started releasing the pollen, and they're actually pretty good when you eat them at this point because they still have a little bit of juices in there, I guess you'd say. They have, that's kind of holding that cone together still. Hasn't dried out yet. Anyway, I'm going to eat that. It's not too bad. Doesn't even taste like that stringent pine flavor. It's just kind of a mild flavor. Pretty good. So hopefully that wasn't too crazy. I'm a guy that tends to try things out, especially after I read things and said these are pine pollen's edible for humans, and not only that, has some good nutritional value to it. I tasted it. It's not bad. If I were out in the woods, definitely, and I kind of felt a little hunger, and there were the pine pollen on the trees, that would be a healthy little snack that I would go to. So some of the things that I plan on doing with the pine pollen that I collected, I hope to be able to put it into some pancakes or some cookies or something like that, and just see if it kind of has a similar consistency to flour, and see if it cooks, and if maybe the taste will change a little bit. I'm not sure. A while back I had another bit of curiosity when I was living down in those desert climates, and I came across the mesquite bean, and the mesquite bean has similar properties. It has a high protein count, and so that kind of got me interested. Whenever I see plants that have high protein counts, I gravitate towards them, because usually that's what people are worried about when they go from a meat-based to a plant-based diet, and they're worried about those proteins, if they're able to get them into their body or not. And so when I come across things like the mesquite bean and now the pine pollen, and realize that they have higher protein contents, then it kind of puts your mind in that same place as like the legumes with the beans, how they have those proteins. Growing up, when my mom would always say, we're going to eat beans because they have the proteins in them, and I just thought beans were like this magical fruit, which the more you eat them, and you know what happens. But it's nice to see that there are other plants out there, and using the resources that we have in nature for our food sources is a good thing. Hopefully you enjoyed this video about pine pollen. I know it's not incredibly informational as far as all the nutritional value and what it can do and what it doesn't do, but there is information out there, and it may not be as researched a product as some other products that we have out there, but it does have some value to it. So if you have some interest in finding out more about pine pollen, I've posted a link down below that is actually linked to some products that sell the pine pollen product, and they've done a little bit of research on that, so you can find a little more about the nutritional information and the reasons why pine pollen is used. I don't know, I just thought it would be just kind of an interesting video, and take a look into pine pollen as far as being considered one of the superfoods of nature.